Hi everyone, we're back with our series of talks with our culture policy designers network members around Europe. And today we are going to the heart of Europe, to Brussels. And I'm joined with Philippe Kern. I don't think that there is a person working in the culture creative industries or culture creative sectors and a strategy or policy making field in Europe and haven't heard from Philippe. You're running KEA European Affairs, one of the the oldest and the most prominent research and strategy centers in Europe on all the matters with strategy, cluster development, research in the field of culture creative industries. You've seen it all, you've done it all, and now you are mapping also the impact and the support policies that European governments have put in place to support the sector in this crisis. So these are some of the topics we are going to talk with you this afternoon. Philippe, how are you and how is Brussels doing?
I'm very good, Ragnar. Good to see you and see you in very good health. In fact, your introduction made me almost blush. So it's a good start. You're putting a lot of pressure on me, But I'm glad to join you and all the people that are going to listen to us, and I hope it's going to be an interesting chat. But I'm fine, and I'm looking forward to our talk.
Super, Philippe. As I mentioned, you work with policymakers, with regions on and also local level in many different countries around Europe and globally. So what's your first take on the crisis? How have the culture creative sectors done so far? Are they hit worse than you expected? How ready they were for such a crisis? And is this going to be a long recovery?
So Ragnar, what is, as you reminded us, we've been into this policy making on culture and creative for some time now, and I've got some gray hair, I cannot hide them. And the only thing I would like to say, obviously the sector is terribly affected by the crisis. It cannot be prepared for such a crisis because a lot of amenities that are aimed at accessing culture have simply closed down. On the policy level, if you ask me on the policy level, I've never seen such a rapid reaction from the sector through their trade representation, through their associations, in terms of addressing the issue and helping their members in understanding what was going on, in developing some recovery funds, in showing elements of solidarity. This is a first thing, and actually making the point to government that they need to act to support and protect the artists, the cultural workers, and the whole ecosystem. And secondly, what I was really astonished that actually a lot of member states, if we talk about Europe now, very rapidly took urgency measures to support the sector. And I think you were mentioning our campaign in trying to gather information on what member state and regions and cities have been doing on COVID-19, the cultural sector. And it happens that 2/3 of countries in Europe have actually adopted measures to shield or to support the sector. So some of them were quite general measures, not necessarily aimed at the cultural and creative industries, but or the cultural creative sectors, but a lot of them actually were specific to the CCS. And the more we go now into the length of the crisis, we can see some of those member states are going into details, the more sectorial approach, because they get feedback from obviously the sectors. The measures are quite different from one country to another, but what came out is indeed, we estimated around 20 countries in the EU have actually adopted some kind of measures to shield the sector.
And why is this? You've been working for a very long time for mainly two reasons. On one side, to support the sector itself to be more coherent, to be more consolidated, to speak with a common voice, and on the other hand, to raise awareness of local, regional, and national and EU policymakers. Do you see that this kind of work has really its first fruits, or there are some other reasons behind it?
No, I think it's a result of now raising the profile of the industry, showing it's 2 million companies in Europe. It's according to Eurostat, 600 billion. In my view, it's more like 900 billion euro contribution to the European GDP. It's 12 million employed people. So politicians are aware now of this, and there are many research being done at national level that shows the contribution, economic and social contribution of the sector, independently of its contribution that we were experiencing in lockdown, where, without books, without TV series, without animations or whatever that takes place on social media, it would make this lockdown even more difficult. So I think there is now a general recognition of the importance of the sector, and people recognize that if they want to maintain this creative ecosystem, this cultural life, they need to do something about it. So it's definitely the awareness of the importance of the sector that is playing a big role there.
What we've seen also, and some of the people from some of the member states have pointed out, is that while you're absolutely right, the governments were quite quick to react and put in place support measures. What we also see that in many of the countries, the lack of the holistic view on culture creative sectors is now taking its toll. So you have measures that might support very specific part of the culture creative sectors, usually bigger institutions, government institutions, public institutions, or core creative professionals and core artists, but then leaving a lot of the value chain out of the equation.
No, definitely. I think what the crisis shows is that there is maybe a need to create some kind of status for artists and technicians, which more or less are considered as freelancers. So and you can be freelancers in different ways, but when you are an artist or you are technicians and there is no production, that you cannot be on a stage, you cannot perform in your theater, you cannot dance, well, you are without any specific income, and there is no way you are going to create any income unless you change trade. So in some countries, artists and those technicians have a status whereby they are protected, socially protected. Some countries have rolled out this protection for some months. President Macron in France just announced it on Wednesday that they will roll out the traditional protection until August 2021. But in many countries, there is not such specific status for individuals that work in the artistic and cultural field. So this begs the question of indeed whether this should not be introduced, considering those type of crises. Maybe the second aspect, which I find interesting, the crisis, that not everybody has been a loser. Some, the digital platforms, the internet, the video on demand platform, the music streaming platforms are going to develop even further services, and therefore this leads us to rethink policy making with a view to not only ensure that production is being made, but is this production going to be distributed? And if the distributors are the Netflix, the Amazon, the Disney Plus in the world, how can we ensure that Estonian artists or production companies are actually present on those platforms, because they are going to be the main distributor in the years to come? So there has been a kind of acceleration of the process of accessing culture through digital media, and the question is whether is this policy adapted to this new environment, to a situation where indeed consumers will behave differently, and are already behaving differently, but they'll behave even more differently because of the changes that this crisis has led to.
So, are you in this camp of people that think that the world will not be the same after this crisis, or do you agree with those saying that the same kind of a doomsday feeling was 2007, 8, 9, 10 crisis? Everybody talked that the world will never be the same. We were pretty quickly back to the same old. So, what's your take on this?
For culture and creative industries, there will be, the changes already are there, but there will be an acceleration because of the crisis, and because we are, when are we going back to the theater, to the cinemas? Should we still spend so much subsidies in producing films? In actually, there won't be any outlets to show those films apart from Netflix, Amazon, or some of the. So we have to rethink this aspect. Whether if your question is broader and actually is about is the society going to change? I think it will. My optimistic view of things will think that there is going to be some changes, because the first time probably in the history of mankind that 3 billion people are locked down all over the world at the same time. Whether you're in India, in China, in America, or in Spain, or in Zimbabwe. Okay, so this makes us feel that we are part of a same problem, and we have to address it all together. And this is where I feel that the cultural creative sector can play a specific role, because we are working with a specialist of creating collaboration, of creating solidarity, and we need the more solidarity, and we need people to move away from prejudices, cultural prejudice, in order to work together to build a world where we can confront pandemics, where we can confront climate changes. So maybe, and this is one of the latest blog I wrote, was about to show how the cultural creative sector can actually contribute in thinking this different world. Of course, the world will quickly go back to the natural. Let's go back to work. Let's make some profits. How is the Wall Street behaving? And all this. But I think the element also I can see in Brussels, for instance, where now they have closed down the city center to encourage people walking, to encourage people bicycling, cycling. All this will not change. So there will be a kind of transformation where we realize we have to change our behaviors. So I think there will be some element of changes. And I really hope that the cultural workers and the artists can actually contribute to the same extent as, let's say, scientists, I would say the people in medicine, that are now constantly being seen on our television. I hope that the creators, people with imagination, can help us indeed consider what could be a decent future.
And I think this thinking still takes a long time. Just yesterday, there was another head of a municipality who, by explaining why she wants to cut first and foremost the salaries of culture people in this particular municipality, said, yes, but we don't need during this crisis this pointless entertainment, whistles and bells. So it's still this kind of this is nothing important.
On the point you just made right now, it's very important from a policy point of view. Is indeed now you can see in the message of politicians, they are highlighting the essential and the non-essential, and very quickly people would say, oh, culture is non-essential. Essential is automotive, is aeronautics, is transport, and so on. So we need to be very careful here in highlighting how much actually supporting culture is essential. and not only from an economic point of view, but also from a social point of view. And you're right to highlight this aspect.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, in your portfolio, you have a lot of experience working with policymakers by creating or helping those regions, cities, or national governments to create favorable conditions where culture creativity could flourish. Now, you mentioned the positive aspect of countries, the governments, the public authorities rushing into providing those funds to help to survive the crisis. Now, helping somebody to survive the crisis is very different from investing into development of something. And we already start hearing from all over Europe examples where long-term investment projects are being cut, where projects developing either clusters or physical environments are being postponed or cancelled. So what would be your message to the policymakers on that level?
I think there is awareness now at policy level that one of the few growth area is in the field of culture and creative industries. We've been able to demonstrate in many countries. This is an area where there is increased investment, public-private investment, increased employment, that the sector is really growing, and independently of whether you are a small linguistic market or a large linguistic market. Because there is a demand. There is a demand for entertainment, there is demand for art, demand for culture. And you as a country, you want to be there and enable your entrepreneurs to exist in this growing marketplace. So I think this is established. Indeed, the issue is a lot of public money is going to be spent on what we see as being essential. And maybe the culture and creative sector, we have to make additional noise to say, hey guys, we're also the essential sector. Don't forget us. And one aspect I was thinking about, you were mentioning it in introduction, is that very often cities, municipalities, regions, government, they're easily recognize the importance of backing the traditional cultural institution. Okay, in the same way they see it's important to support the traditional, the locally based airline, and the point why the local airline will be given billion to withstand the crisis, they will also be given some conditions to adapt to climate changes, to these new demands of our world. I hope in the same way there will be a request in exchange for public funding that cultural institutions maybe also adapt the way they behave, maybe with the other cultural actors that are not so heavily subsidized, maybe with reaching out to a population that is no longer going to the theaters or the opera, or actually not able or cannot afford to go there. So this might be also an opportunity to help those institutions that are well established, sometimes well funded, to evolve with the mutation that is taking place in the marketplace. So I think we need to show that it is worthwhile investing in the sector the same way it is worthwhile to invest in other sectors, and actually showcase why. And secondly, it's also the opportunity to show that the sector is responsible and is ready to adapt to a new landscape.
Culture creative sectors have been, and you have yourself been characterizing them in numerous reports as, the forerunners of innovation, innovative thinking, out of the box, design thinking, agile, all of that. When the crisis hit, naturally it shook the entire sector as an earthquake. We've seen, as you mentioned yourself, the winners and losers. We've seen that already the crisis have had, first of let's say positive, maybe wrong word, but effects. If you look at the cultural institutions, is probably the last month, the digital transformation we've seen is being more than the past 5 years totally. And something that was always postponed as something that is maybe not essential, or, you know, maybe as long as you have a high level of culture consumption, you don't really need to invest too much of a digital platform. My question to you is more of a long-term impact on this. What would you recommend, or where do you think the culture creative companies, institutions, organizations should pay most attention to at this very moment, while the medical crisis or healthcare crisis is turning slowly into a long-term economic crisis? What should they pay attention to in order to get out of the crisis faster and maybe stronger than they were before?
I think to come back to what you said in introduction, I think the sector has to maybe take a more holistic views on their competence and skills, and see that independently of their activities in their given sector, they can influence or they can be part of something bigger and broader. And it reminded me of the press conference that, or it was not a press conference, one kind of brainstorm that President Macron organized on Wednesday in Paris. And it was very funny because he organized like a brainstorm with some artists, and it was obviously not well prepared. But the idea of what I found interesting is that President Macron was trying to, was calling on the artists to invent something, to invent the after crisis. And the artists that were involved in the call didn't really understand the question, because they thought they was just here to listen what would be the measures that would be taken to support the sector. And so at the end, for me, the only interesting idea that came out of this brainstorm was to say, Macron was saying, all the artists will be invited at schools now and during the summer to talk imagination and creativity to the children. Okay, and so on one side you had a political leader say, hey guys, help me change society. And on the other side, the artists were not prepared. They said, okay, I want to make my music and my theater. What are you asking me there? And this is what I'm saying, is that maybe the crisis, maybe the opportunity to go further than the traditional sectorial view. I'm doing theaters, I'm doing music, and see how the cultural workers can contribute broader than this. Very often, cultural workers or artists are being used in social policy and addressing social issues, but they don't consider themselves as social workers, and they should not consider themselves social workers. That they should see their skills and competence in terms of addressing issues or in terms of helping innovation beyond their traditional scope of activities, because they have something that others don't have. They have this creative skill, this way of looking at things from a different angle, playing with metaphors, being poetic, helping people think different ways, and therefore be able to act almost as kind of consultant in innovation. So not every artist or cultural workers can do this, but they need to realize that they have these skills in themselves, and that what they are good at can actually benefit society and other fields of policy making in more generally. So they could be consulted in urban planification. They can be consulted in addressing social inclusion. They can be or prepare or actually work in specific performances or programs that address those issues.
Fantastic to talk to you. I would like to continue, but to wrap up, I have one last question. as I mentioned, you worked with so many regional authorities and the local authorities, including European Capital of Cultures, for example. And most of your work, which is focused on how can we turn a particular place into more creative or more competitive using its creative potential, tries to balance always these two key ingredients. On one hand, it's the local resources, it's the residency, it's a living environment and the creative environment locally, and then matching this with the visitor's perspective, promotion of tourism, attracting investments, etc. Now, I'm just very curious about the world which we'll see probably, at least for the few next years, considerably less traveling, less foreign travel, less visitors, a significant impact on tourism. How will that change the way those creative strategies for cities, for example, or regions, should be made, updated, and implemented?
No, you're right, and this is a difficulty when we address the culture and creative sector. First, the word culture, has so many different meanings. It has more values than actually meanings. It's a different concept. So when we talk about music and film, the issues are going to be different when you work in the field of heritage and tourism, obviously. And now you're raising the issue of, we are now shrinked in our little frontiers. We won't get as many visitors as maybe in the past. The tourists are but maybe the tourists are going to be the local tourists discovering their own culture, their own heritage. Instead of flying abroad and enjoying the beach somewhere, they'll say, oh wow, maybe I should visit this castle or I should go to this performance because and maybe rediscover what makes their world so original. And then there is other way to travel. We're all traveling through social media, through the computer, and the issue is how you ensure that your culture, your language, your singularity, your identity exists on those networks. So this is what I was starting with. We need to rethink the way we make available this identity, this culture, and how we can make it exist through the internet platforms, distribution platforms. How we can get the managing or the shareholders of Amazon, of Netflix to realize that indeed they need to make available this cultural diversity, or this cultural diversity as being something that is so necessary in the development of humankind, that we need to move away from kind of standardized, internationally standardized practice, because the crisis has shown that in the same way as we need biological diversity, we need a cultural diversity. So this, obviously, it's difficult. It's easy to say, very difficult to implement, because the economics doesn't play for this. But if people show a demand for it, the market I'm sure will react. And actually, when I started my business, I was convinced that Hollywood will take over the world, and that the major companies will take over. But with internet, you can actually, that independent music is doing better than major companies in the music field. And we can see also that local TV programs, local series are doing extremely well. What is just missing is the fact that the offer is not sufficiently pulled together and as an easy access for consumers. So consumers know how to go to Netflix, but we are not good as Europeans in actually collectivizing our offer to make a point of entry for consumers. And so I hope that the crisis will force the Europeans to work more collectively, and to make it easier for consumers to access the different and the peculiar.
Philippe, I need to ask from you one question, because I think that you are one of the best experts in Europe for this. What's your take on the European Union role in this crisis? There has been very critical voices saying that Europe missed the opportunity. Europe was extremely slow in reacting. And actually, one thing that the crisis has shown is that the European Union, European family, as we know it, or as we thought we knew it, actually failed. Do you agree such a pessimistic view on Europe in this role? And if yes, how will this impact the European integration in years to come?
Oh my God, this is a big question. But Ragnar, I think we're always unfair with the European Union. First, we need to remind people that the European Union has no competence in the field of health and sanitary issues. So the Union maybe could have done more on his own initiative, but with the risk of getting the member states saying, "Hey, you have nothing to do in there. Leave us aside." Secondly, we are completely unfair because compared to the financial crisis in 2008, actually the EU has very rapidly developed systems with the European Central Bank, with the European Investment Bank, making funds available to support member states in terms of developing the debts or financing activities and so on. For instance, in telling that state aid would not apply in relation to support to specific industries. So here we have been. It has been unprecedented a movement in terms of supporting the economy, and there we cannot blame the European Union. I think it has done as much as it could. Where the union has been maybe not as good, and this is why the cultural sector need to play a role here, is that we know that the solidarity in Europe is very much linked to economic solidarity. And we can easily see that when there is a crisis, some member state would say, "Oh, why should we pay for the lousy southerners or the lazy, whatever?" And the others, the southerners, will say, "Oh, those arrogant and pingy or stingy northerners." So this is a lot of cultural prejudices are still making the EU something that is not worked as really as a union. And I always advocate in my papers that if the European Union is also about creating a union and a solidarity among people and citizens, it needs to create mutual understanding between people, so that people in Portugal understand as much as possible, the kind of mentality of the Estonian. So not only as a tourist, but also as a culture. And this is where there need to be more emphasis in terms of policy making in the future at EU level to support culture, not only in relation to projects or in relation to specific productions, but also in terms of enabling exchanges, cultural exchanges, better mutual understanding. And we have a role to play in this.
If I would call you today in a year, in May 2021, hopefully I will call you before that, but when I call you in 1 year, what would the world look like?
I don't think it will change dramatically. There will be some kind of acceleration in the evolution of the sector. I hope people will be more relaxed, less stressed by their work, taking with a pinch of salt with some distance, because they realized by staying at home with their children how much they miss this kind of family community, and how much they miss their relationship with their friends and with I hope that the world will revert back to something that is more human-centered, maybe less scientific, less led by techniques, and we'll revert back to the human values, and this is where the sector, cultural creative sector, is a specialist. So it will have a lot to offer in enabling these reconnections in our human self.
Thank you, Philippe. It was a pleasure to talk to you. You, as you mentioned, you're optimist as always.
I'm an optimist, yeah.
And we need that more than ever in those difficult times. Until next time.
Yes, thanks very much, Ragnar, for the opportunity of the show. It's always good to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All the best.